Did your manager ask you to share or transfer the knowledge you have on a code base to somebody else, to somebody new on the team? How did you approach it? Did you simply explain everything in one go? Did you try to write loads of documentation to solve the problem? Are you tired of explaining everything without any structure to a new person? Are they tired of not understanding? Are they tired of taking too long to understand? Or are they not even asking the right questions? In this video, I'll talk about sharing knowledge between software engineers. First, I'll start with things to avoid. Then I'll talk about 7 things for effective knowledge sharing. Let's get into it. The first thing to avoid is to not become an educator of things you don't own. Take React or any other library, for example. There's other documentation out there that probably does a better job than whatever you can come up with on the spot. If somebody has an Angular background, they now need to learn React, the best way to do that is probably by themselves, by reading official docs, by reading migration guides, or how to learn React from an Angular background. There's many blogs out there and resources you can use. If you just whip up a quick Create React app and start building your To-Do MVC app and you have this background, this specific background, you can probably make that work. Learning a new skill like a library, something you don't own, is not something that belongs in knowledge sharing context. Another thing to avoid is to just write documentation on a specific topic, to just dump your brain, write down everything you can think of and expect that stuff to be useful. That's not how documentation works. Documentation needs to have a purpose, it needs to have a use case, otherwise it's not relevant to the reader, otherwise it doesn't actually solve the problem of the reader. I have a whole video on documentation and how to do good documentation if you want to learn more about that. Another thing to avoid is any form of communication that doesn't support quick bouncing back question and answer interaction. If you can't have the question and the answer immediately, then this is going to take you a lot more time. You can't, as the sharer of knowledge, you can't see where this person is going wrong with their understanding and intervene and tell them, no, this is not what I meant, this is actually what I meant. And as the learner, you can't actively pose a question if the body is documentation or email. Large bodies of text don't work in this context. It's just going to take you a lot more time to actually understand it if you can't quickly pose a question. Another thing to avoid is to expect everybody to be the best at everything. Some specialization in teams is okay. It has a very high cost for everybody to know every part of the code base. It's already risk averse if you have 2 people working on a specific part of the code base while the rest doesn't know too much about it. They have a global ID, but they don't know the specifics. That is okay. If somebody changes jobs or whatever happens to this person, then you can start onboarding another person on that specific part. But having everybody own everything at all times is just very expensive. There's also seniority and skill set differences. If there's just a new junior on the team, why make this person learn all the complexities of the scaling algorithm you have in Kubernetes? That's a lot of complexity you would dump on this person, making them very ineffective. Or the person that is transferring knowledge, sharing knowledge with this person, also be very ineffective. It would be very high cost to transfer all that complexity, and it isn't necessary at all. If a leader tells you to share knowledge, hopefully on a specific topic, feel free to challenge them. Why, for what purpose do you want me to share this knowledge? Is it a good idea to share this specific knowledge? Is it not already owned by enough people? Why even more? Is this the right person? Why this specific person? Is this person not too junior? Does this person not already have too many responsibilities on their plates? And only then ask yourself, how can this knowledge be shared best? What is the right way? Let's look at the how. Let's look at 7 ways of sharing knowledge effectively. First, pair programming. Pair programming is very good for gaining specific in-depth knowledge of a part of the code base, some section of the code base that is cut off from the rest. It is very good for these details. While you're pair programming, you're continuously explaining and discussing things, you're solving problems together, and therefore you're building up new knowledge together. It is therefore the most natural way of transferring knowledge, of sharing knowledge, because you're doing it while on the job. You're also adding value, you're just combining the way of sharing knowledge at the same time. It is also the best and the most natural way of building up new knowledge and thereby preventing the need from sharing it in the future. If you're solving a new problem in a certain way that wasn't solved before in this specific code base, then now you are doing this together. You don't need to share it afterwards anymore. You just have this knowledge in 2 heads already. Next, code reviews. After pair programming, code reviews are probably the second most natural way of doing knowledge sharing. If you have worked on a specific piece of the code base and you need a code review, who are you going to ask to do that code review for you? Is it the person that has already worked on it, already knows how this specific part works? Or do you pick the person that has no experience with this whatsoever? Yes, it will take longer, but for the price of having that knowledge in that person's head as well. Now you own this together with the three of you maybe. If you're the only one, make sure you do a code review because you're the only one owning it right now. If the whole team knows it already, it doesn't maybe really matter. If you ask yourself the question, who should own this with me? It will automatically lead you to an answer of who should do this code review for you. You could also do a code review together to pair a code review. If you don't know a specific part yet, but your colleague does, and yet another colleague has written some code, why not take this other colleague that has the knowledge already to review this part together? You can pose questions, understand and learn this piece of the code base as well. And for a good code review, before you start reading the whole thing from start to end, make sure you have a face-to-face call or a video chat with the author so that you can learn about the key task and the main problem that was being solved, how the solution was designed, so that you get a high-level overview of the whole thing. This is very valuable in sharing knowledge. Only then, by yourself or with somebody else, you can do the line-by-line code review. Next, presentations. Presentations are probably the purest form of explaining something structurally. They're about taking the time to figure out what structure are you going to explain something, to then make slides, to figure out these are the words I'm going to put on my slides, these are the diagrams that match the story I'm trying to tell, to then tell the story, to stand there with your slide deck, to explain the whole thing, to leave room for questions, to have questions at the end, but also in the middle. Maybe you have a meeting, a regular meeting with the dev team where you discuss technical debt and other things, maybe the direction of your code base. A presentation is very well suited for that kind of context where your audience is the devs you work with together. Presentations are very good for high-level concepts, for any ideas or bigger structures that you have in your code base. They're not very good for lots of details, especially if you get all kinds of questions and you have to pick up an editor and share screen and talk through all the details. That's not where presentations and that kind of setting makes sense. It's for the high level stuff. Presentations have their place, but don't use them for everything. And especially don't make some PowerPoint deck and share it with somebody who is not hearing you explaining the whole thing. That's just the worst possible format of documentation. Next, mentoring. Mentoring, let me define it first, is different from coaching. A mentor-mentee relationship is a longer term commitment. The initiative with mentorship lies with the mentor. It's a very directive style of educating. It's a very instructive. I am telling you this thing. I am advising you to do this. This is the mentor has an agenda of what kind of topics to discuss. This is opposed to coaching, where coaching is very reactive. The initiative for coaching lies with the learner. Can you give me feedback on this thing? Can you listen to my ideas and tell me whether I'm right or wrong? Mentorship, I think, is very effective for transferring knowledge. A mentor-mentee relationship works very well for larger topics. Take, for example, backend for frontend. If you have a team full of full-stack developers and you now hire a person that only knows React and doesn't have experience with Node.js yet, then having this relationship with this person and coming together, for 3 weeks, every day for 1 hour, or with every new user story that the new person picks up, the first few hours after the new person has made a plan, the mentor would come in and do a review of the plan that was being made before they have typed lots of code yet, so that at the right point in time, a review is already being done. This is a very healthy way of learning lots of new things in a very short amount of time by getting lots of personal attention in an interactive way. The mentor takes the time to explain both concepts and also details, starting with the purpose of things and the architecture of things. How does the data flow go? And then slowly going towards more details. Really being in control of how the mentee learns things in what order so that they don't get overloaded. Number 5 is being very available for questions. It's something I've seen successful in people who are very self-educated, who are very investigative, who are very good at understanding existing code. It doesn't work for everybody. The learner has to want to approach it this way, and it really can only work if you are available at all times. The moment they're learning, they have to be able to fire a question your way. You have to make time for them. You have to immediately give an answer to them. Then it can be effective. If they get stuck, if they have to wait for you for even more than 5 minutes, then it can become very ineffective. Then it can be very time consuming and frustrating for the learner. Next, psychological safety, which is a passive way of transferring knowledge. It's not something you can rely on if you need to transfer knowledge right now. It's something that happens over time. It will, if you have a very high psychological safety, will aid all future knowledge transfer. What is psychological safety? Psychological safety is the certainty for a person that they will not be judged by somebody else by, for example, asking a certain question. If somebody is learning a new topic, then if they feel they can take the space to ask a question and they're not exposing themselves to ridicule or to hearing that something is a stupid question or to any of these other judgments, that they feel free to ask this question without being seen as less worthy. Oh, you don't know that stuff yet, then I will let you know this, I will judge you for this. If people feel free to ask these questions, they'll learn twice as fast, and they're giving you the information of where the knowledge gap is, because they are asking you the question, they're giving you the information. This is what I'm missing, please answer this part for me. This is not an active way of knowledge sharing, of course. It will help you for all knowledge sharing in the future if you have a high psychological safety. And lastly, having great tests, great test suite in your code base is another passive way of sharing knowledge. You need less active knowledge sharing if you have great tests. The tests themselves should be a description of the code base. They should tell you in detail how things work, especially if you have ATDD, acceptance test driven development, or BDD, behavior driven development, where you have user stories where the acceptance criteria in your user story literally becomes your test name. Then the moment you read these test names and later these implementations, you get a feel for the value that is being delivered, a feel for the structure of the code base. You already get the purpose and the architecture out of just reading the tests. This means you need less knowledge transfer, not less knowledge sharing by a colleague. Having a good test suite has many values. It is definitely useful to read them, but don't be fooled. It is never a substitute for being able to have a conversation with your colleague, to pose questions, to quickly get an answer and to learn from them. It is never okay to leave somebody alone to read lots of code or a test suite and figure it all out by themselves. To summarize, think about what will actually stick with the learner. Simply writing loads of documentation or explaining something from start to end isn't going to stick. It will cost lots of time and money, and it will not actually help the learner. The hard truth is that knowledge sharing is a multi-person job. The more interactive it is, the more question and answer interaction you have, the better it is for the learner. And that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope this was helpful. If you have any thoughts, if I've made a mistake, or if you have an idea for a future video, leave a comment and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching.